Hello, it's Alistair McIntyre from Electric Scotland, and I thought this week I would produce another wee newsletter for you in video format. Part of the reason for doing this one is that there's quite a lot of really interesting stuff going up on the site over last week and this week. And I thought I would just give you a wee kind of guide to some of the things that I think would be really interesting for you to have a read at. Firstly, I might say that we've now completed the book Our Ain Folk, which I am hoping that you enjoyed it. Certainly I've had a few emails in telling me that people have enjoyed them. But the thing is, in that book, it's Ain Folk, he talks about getting a lot of material in about Scottish humour, and he mentions that he'd like to perhaps do a book on Scottish humour at some time in the future. Well, while I was looking at, I must confess I couldn't find that book anywhere, but subsequently I have found it. And so now if you go to the index page of Our Ain Folk, you'll find a link at the foot of the page for the Scottish Humour book. And it's one that I would recommend you right-click on the link and choose to save the PDF file to your own computer. Because I think it's a book that's worth dipping into when you just have a few minutes or half an hour to spare. Because what I love about his book is that when he tells a story, he puts it into context. So if you just got the humour story on its own with no explanation behind it, you wouldn't find it very funny. But as he explains the background, it becomes a funny story. And I know that why I think that's quite important is I remember, quite a number of years ago, I put up another book on the site, and it was specifically to writing about Scottish humour. And what the author was actually saying, that 50 years ago, we had a kind of humour, and he was quoting some of the humorous stories from there. And he was saying, and of course today, it means nothing to us. You know, it's in no way funny at all. But then, from his day, he quotes a similar story but told at the same time as he's living and writing this book, and illustrates, now that's funny. But of course, as I'm reading this about maybe 150 years after he wrote that, I don't see anything funny in that either. And that's why I think his book is really good, because he goes to the trouble of giving you the background to where the story came from and what the people were that were telling the story to each other. And that way, I must confess, I found this very amusing indeed. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book. So I just wanted to highlight that, because I thought this is something that you could just save in your own computer and pull it up from time to time. And I might add, if you ever give talks to anyone, that there's actually quite a few wee stories in there which would be quite good to give at a talk, if you want to kind of break the ice a wee bit. Anyway, following on with the Ain Folk, I also mentioned that he had written 3 more books, one on New Zealand, one on Australia, one on India. And because he was brought up in this small glen, really, in Scotland, I thought it would be interesting to follow his travels all over the world, because he obviously writes from a peculiarly Scottish perspective. And having read the 3 books that he produced, I must confess I've thoroughly enjoyed reading them, and it's opened up my eyes to the way life was lived back in those days. So as we finish one of his books, we'll continue with the next until we've finished the 3 volumes. And this week we've just started our New Zealand cousins. So after that we'll probably go to Australia, and then we'll finish with his Tigerland book, which is on India. So that's just to let you know about that little side. We've also started a book about Loch Kinnaird. And again, this is, again, to me it's a fascinating book, because it's written about an area that is very remote. In fact, even today, there's not a road through it. There is a road around it. So if you wanted to actually visit it, you'd need to be a wee bit of a walker. But I'm just gobsmacked and amazed at how much history is in that area. And so if you were a walker and you were in Scotland, somewhere near that area, I think it'd be well worth your time driving up there, parking the car and taking a picnic with you on your backpack and going walking to that loch, because there's a crannog on the loch and there's standing stones and other ancient memorials around the area, so well worth exploring. And I think the book's been written in a very interesting way. And then we started another book which was about Geeky, who is maybe the geologist around the place. He was big in geology. And it's one of what I call the famous Scots series of books that I've been working on for a few years now. It's where someone did something amazing and broke new ground in his profession. I wanted to write about that person so we understand how he grew up and the problems and opportunities he got as he was developing, up into how he got to his preeminent position by the end of his life. So that's another one. But there's probably two other areas. I've been working on the Scottish Historical Review magazines. These are old copies, but it's got a whole ton of interesting information in them, and I am extracting quite a wee bit from them for the site. But one of the books, it was a review of a book I found. It was about Serbia, Montenegro. Now you'll probably remember how after Tito died, Yugoslavia just broke up into separate entities, and there was pretty nasty wars going on there and everything. And I was always personally challenged to really understand the area and what the historic issues were. And I have to say that if I'd had this book at the time, it would have made, I would just have understood it a lot better. And as I was spotted that book, I thought, I'd almost like to put that on the site. And then as I was going through more of the reviews, and I found one on Portugal, Old and Young. And again, that one from the review, education all about Portugal. And then I found Italy, and I thought, wait a minute. Because we, in our Scots diaspora section of the site, we have all of those countries mentioned, and I found information on Scots within each of those countries. Some of them I found a ton of stuff, and others I found almost nothing. But at least we've got a section for them, and so if more information becomes available, I can add it to that section. But I thought to myself, well, as we've got these sections, it's probably worthwhile having some kind of history of that country up on the site as well, so you can again get an understanding of how the country's developed over the years. And obviously if there's a lot of Scots in that country, then you'll be able to get an idea of how they fitted in to how the country developed over the years. So as I say, we've got Italy, we've also got a book about Japan as well up there. So there's a wee group of countries that I've actually put some histories up at. And what I thought I would do here, because it's a history of another country, I didn't feel it was probably my job to OCR that in. But what I have done is I've OCR'd the review, which gives you a nice wee overview of the book. And if you like it and are interested enough, then I've given you a link where you can download the book. But the other area which I got quite excited about was some of the more general articles that I found in this last couple of weeks. For example, there's one about the distaff side. This is a study in matrimonial adventure in the 15th and 16th centuries. But what I quite liked about this article is that the author made a point that, and it's a point I've made as well in the past, that when you do family histories and genealogy, you're normally following the chiefly line, in other words, the male line. And there's almost no information on the women that were in the families. And so this is an article, it's actually by a man, Bruce Seaton, but he's talking about this and obviously encouraging people to do more research into the female side of these lines. And so just having a read, I think, it just makes you think about how important it is that you do trace the women in the lines. Then there's, I've got a variety of ones up, but there's a couple of others which I just think were pretty amazing. One was an address delivered by, and I won't know if I can pronounce the name right, but Mr. Raymond Poincaré, who was president of the French Republic during World War I. But what I didn't know, of course, was he was also the Lord Rector of the University of Glasgow. And to be a rector of Glasgow, this is the students that vote the rector in. And he's normally in for a 3-year term. And the only onerous job he has in that 3 years is that 1 year he must go to Glasgow and give an address to the students. And so this is a little review of that address, but I managed to find a copy of the actual address he gave, which kind of blew my mind a wee bit. He clearly knew all about the old alliance between Scotland and France and refers to that quite frequently. But he also was very impressed with the Scots who came over to fight in the war on French soil. I think it's not a big book because it's an address after all. So I would highly recommend that you have a read at that, because it was just a great read. And then there was another book which I found, which was about the Seaforth Highlanders. Now, the Seaforth Highlanders I knew had fought in World War I. But one of the things you never really get is an idea of how many died in those wars. And I got to tell you, if you read this particular article on the Seaforth Highlanders, I can only say it's a truly terrible account of the huge casualties that we had during that war. And this is just with basically one regiment. There were other regiments there as well, but if you read through that, look at the battles and look at the huge number of casualties there were in that war, it's almost unimaginable from today. I know we're in Afghanistan and Iraq and there's hundreds have died, but we're talking here tens of thousands that died. Horrific. So that's up. But there's even a little story about peasant life in Argyllshire at the end of the 18th century. So you're talking about 1770, 1780 time. And to me this was a charming article because it actually went into a little bit better detail into some of the ways that people live. For example, one of the stories is that the people of the village were told there was a press gang coming. And so the women got all the men to go out in the fields and out of the village and out of sight. And when the sergeant and his men from this press gang turned up to obviously get the men, they were astonished. There was no men in the village at all. But they did notice a lot of the women. And next thing you know, all the women are actually throwing clods of earth at them and everything. In which case the sergeant said, "Right, retreat!" He said, and apparently he muttered to himself, "I'm not fighting women and children." So off they went. So they protected them in that area. But also there's a beautiful account of the summer pasture in June, taking the cattle out to the hillsides and obviously living in the shieldings and so forth for a period of time. But it's probably the most detail that I've come across about just that movement of the cattle to the summer pastures and what they did in the shieldings and stuff like that. That's not a big article, but I really enjoyed it, and it opened my eyes a little bit more into how people lived back in those days. So I'm hoping you'll really enjoy that as well. And as I say, as I'm working through these articles, if I find anything particularly good, I just grab it and I'll stick it up on the side. If it's a huge article, then I might put it into a PDF file, or I might just OCR the whole thing straight onto the site. Sometimes if there's a lot of Scots language stuff, I'm more inclined to put it into PDF because it takes an awful lot longer to spell check all that. But anyway, these are some of the articles, and of course this week we've got lots of poems in from John Henderson, and as you know, John, he writes a lot in the Doric language, which is the language of the Aberdeenshire area of Scotland, and he usually puts some music behind the songs that he actually composes himself, so it gives you a kind of appropriate music to sing the song along with him. But as you know, he's also created the John Sing-Along section, and he's sent another couple of contributions in for that. And certainly everything in that sing-along section are actual songs that the artists will be singing to you, so you can listen to them with the words. But we have arranged, and I think it works in most browsers, but when you click the link to the song, it should come up in a new window. So it will play to you in a new window, but while it's playing, you can of course go back to the original window and actually follow the words as it's being sung to you. So you'll understand the words a little bit better that way, because obviously Scots words can be a bit difficult to figure out. So this way you get to read the words and follow the song at the same time. And also Frank Shaw has done another column for his Robert Burns Lives series. This time it's about George Wilkie and his new book, The Letters of Robert Burns, which is a fabulous book. And I might add, we actually had that book on the site for 2 years, but as it's now being printed, the publishers have asked us if we would please now take it off. That's not to say we can't put it back on at some future date, but obviously they want some book sales. And we have a link on that page if you would like to buy the book, because if you go to Amazon.com, there is a Kindle edition as well. I think it's $9.99, I think is all it costs. But also I put a couple of links because thanks to George, he's kindly allowed us to put up his Understanding Robert Burns on the site, and I must confess I've requested that he makes that available as a PDF or as a Kindle book. And I have to say, if he made it available as a Kindle book, I'd buy a copy, because it's a great reference source. And he's also got Robert Burns' To the Lassies is another book that we have up on the site by him. So those links are there from that. But certainly Frank was very complimentary about his very latest book that he's obviously just got printed. I think that's about it, because as I say, I really just wanted to highlight a few things that I thought were worth highlighting to you, because there's some splendid reading this week, and I hope you'll take the time to have a read of the stuff I've highlighted. So, I mean, there you go. I'm actually doing this on Tuesdays, so the newsletter won't be going out till Thursday evening, but if something massively breaks, I'll maybe redo the video to take it into account, but otherwise that's what I've got up so far. So I hope you enjoy this week's newsletter, and I hope you join some of the content that we've put up. Thanks for listening.